almost everybody has their own problems or constraints in whatever their goals are. And a lot of small businesses especially face a lot of these constraints, especially around money and things like that. And I wanted to share a useful frame that I've had on constraints for a while, because I think most people complain about their constraints. And I think actually constraints are incredibly useful. And they're essentially forcing functions to make you more efficient. And if you can place constraints on yourself, I think you can become incredibly effective as a problem solver. And so, when you work within constraints, I think when you know what constraints you have, it makes it much easier because you then have the parameters of the problem that you're trying to solve. And so I think it is really important to identify the constraints that you have and then figure out how to work within those. And one of the constraints that I've been working with a lot lately is basically like, how do I, with my burn rate completely fixed, double or triple the size of my business? And so basically that question forces me to ask, how can I better allocate the resources? And the way that I know that I'm not maximizing my resource allocation right now is actually by revenue per employee. And I think this is one of the most interesting exercises I've had in terms of business in a while. But my revenue per employee is not where I would like it to be. And when I compare it to kind of industry averages, revenue per employee is a good chunk higher than what I do. And so if that's the case, then I know that, employees being my resources, I know that, and that includes myself, I know that I can allocate them more efficiently to make more money because other people, other players in the same industry as me are making more per unit of resource, right? In this case, employees, whatever it is, they are making more per unit of resource than I am. And that means I'm running a less efficient business than they are. And so it begs the question, how can I better allocate those existing resources? And so I think that's a very useful exercise for me, and I've found it. I've been finding it incredibly interesting, and I think it'll result in a very net positive decision. And I think most people, especially when you're small, you don't have enough data, and so people just act on a kind of a whim. And so they're like, oh, I feel like I can spend more. I'm going to go out and spend more, or I feel like I have to save. I think when you know your constraints, firstly, I think that's the first step that's really important. And most people skip that. And then the second thing is you have to, working within those is not a problem. Every business has a constraint. Every business has a constraint. And once you solve the constraint, you then unlock the next, bit of growth. And even on a personal level, let's say, you give yourself a constraint of whatever, X dollars per month, and then you have to work within that. And it will force you to be more efficient with things. And so I think that is a useful frame to think of restrictions and things like that. I have really enjoyed that recently, honestly. That is what creates a problem, right? It is the constraint. And so it's how you figure that out. I think they are the most important thing to focus your attention on in any context, whether in personal or professional. I think you can apply that framework of what is the constraint? How do I solve it? Figuring out your constraint is not always the easiest thing, but constraints are good because they can very clearly define the parameters within which you have to work. And if you apply a constraint on yourself, you can make yourself way more efficient, right? If you apply the right constraints. So for example, let's say I have a budget of 2 hours per week to cook. How do I cook everything within those 2 hours? So I've applied an artificial constraint there for myself that's going to, in time, save me a lot of time. And or let's say I have 2 hours to cook and a budget of $100 per week. How do I fix? So that is going to make me very efficient, and on a personal level, with my resources. Constraints are really good to make you efficient. Because they force you into efficiency, right? That's the whole point, is that you cannot go beyond, you restrict the level of input, but you want the same amount of output, and asking yourself how to solve that problem. Well, I find it fun. That's something I've been enjoying a lot recently in all kinds of aspects. And you'd be surprised how far you can go with the resources that you have. I think in general, people are extremely inefficient with resources. Even something as simple as your wardrobe, right? There's something called Paretos Principle, and that's the 80-20 rule. So 80% of the value comes from 20% of what's in there. A lot of people keep massive wardrobes that they don't use. They don't use most of the stuff that's in there. And so if you had a constraint of space, for example, let's say I only have, let's say I give myself only like one door worth of wardrobe space. Every single item in there will be far more important to me because I can only pick so many things. Or for example, let's say over my lifetime, I can only keep 20 pieces of art with me at all time, right? Let's say I'm an art collector. If I can only keep 20 pieces of art, I'm going to be very particular about which 20 pieces, because when I have 20 and I want to buy one more, one of them has to go. And so you'll think very carefully about the things that you keep. This is a constraint like that I apply on myself. I keep very few things. Not like ridiculously few, but I very quickly get rid of things if they don't serve me. And that's because I like things decluttered, but that idea of restricting the number of things that I can have is one that I like a lot. And it in turn makes everything that you therefore own far more valuable to you on an intrinsic level, because you don't have like some unlimited amount. And so I think that's a useful framework that a lot of people don't apply. And just some thoughts, maybe. Use your constraints to help you. Do not complain about your constraints. Use them to help you. If you don't have money, if you don't have space, if you don't have time, whatever it is, like reframe it as a problem to solve. And I think that can help digest it. If it's something that's very hard to deal with or that you struggle with, like, so I started this business when I was still in school, and one of the main constraints became time. And so it became a question of, okay, how can I run this business as efficiently as possible with as little time as I can, right? And like, instead of complaining, oh, I don't have enough time, I can't make this work, it became a case of, okay, how do I make this work in spite of that constraint of time or whatever it is? And you can replace that constraint with whatever you want, and you can create artificial constraints that can make you far more efficient as a person. And at least for me, like, I enjoy that. Like, things in my life become a lot easier, actually. Like, when you apply that problem, it feels a little bit uncomfortable, but over time it gets really easy, because you have made a system or to solve that particular constraint, and that becomes, because it becomes predictable. And so, like, for example, I used to have a lot of things on my desk, and now I have this bag, and everything that fits on my desk, other than my laptop and my iPad, should pretty much fit in this thing. This thing has a bunch of little things inside, and it's a little bag from Bellroy. I absolutely love it. I haven't bought any other Bellroy products, but this one's good. And it gave me a kind of constraint of, like, everything that I buy for a kind of desk or work purpose has to fit in here. And that, initially you might think, oh, that's such a pain, right? Because I don't have space for everything. But the thing is, it made me pick much more carefully the things that I wanted to keep. And then now it is like such a big blessing, because anywhere I can move really, really quickly, because I grab my laptop, I grab this, and I have everything. That's it. And like, at least for me, having like one place full of, like, and you can apply this for other things. And so it helps me keep my desk really clean. Like, that's something I enjoy a lot. I don't like having a desk that's really cluttered, and it just makes it easy to move around. And for me, like, traveling is something that I do a lot. I might go work outside somewhere. I like to work at, like, outside of my house sometimes, and just having that immediately whenever I want is something that is very useful to me. And over time, I have come to appreciate just how easy that makes my life. Like, I pick up and go. It takes me 2 minutes, not 2 minutes, 10 seconds. Like, I'm ready to go in 10 seconds. And that it's over time, saves you a lot of time and even headache. I don't lose anything. I always know where everything is. In there, I have a thing to undo screws. I have a lock, like, all little kind of miscellaneous bits and pieces that are also really useful, but I managed to fit them in, and it makes my life so easy because I know where everything is very quickly. So yeah, anyway, I think that is a reflection that potentially most people don't have about their problems, but I think if you use problems to your advantage, obviously, like certain problems in certain contexts, yeah, you can make your life a lot easier, actually.